Hey there, I'm Stefan, and welcome to my channel that I haven't uploaded videos in for like about a year. You ready for a really long video about a movie I like again? Because I've decided I really want to talk about how much I enjoyed The Last Jedi. And, you know, judging by all these people who watch this video, apparently other people want to see more videos like that too, so I guess it all works out. Now, this isn't necessarily to devalue other people's criticism of the film. I'll address the most popular critiques of the film here and there, but I mostly want to give my perspective on why I personally really enjoyed this film. If you love it too, then this may just be a video where you sit back and agree with me and maybe find new things to appreciate. If you didn't enjoy it, you may find this to be a non-judgmental space where you can maybe learn why someone might like it so much. Well, let me clarify. If you're the kind of person who decided that it was your job to go and harass the people who made this movie because they made a Star Wars movie you didn't like, you're a fucking child and a bad person. Okay, everyone else though, you can stick around. You don't have to like the movie to watch this video. I'm just gonna explain why I did, and if you didn't like it, that's fine. I assume a lot of people who really hate the movie though will let me know whether I want them to or not. So, all that said, I'm gonna say right off the bat, the film is not flawless. I don't believe a perfect film can even exist. Entertainment is too subjective of a medium for that to be realistically possible. I've never seen a film I couldn't see flaws in, no matter how much I enjoy them. So this isn't a video attempting to ignore the fact that the film has flaws, as all films do, but to discuss the positive aspects that supersede most of those flaws for many viewers. So, all that said, let's put the film into context before jumping into it. The Last Jedi is a movie that has been ridiculously hyped. Not as much as The Force Awakens was, but arguably there's just as much pressure for this film as there was for the previous entry. The Force Awakens had the job of reintroducing us to the Star Wars universe, something I'd say it did really well. Yes, it was intentionally and obviously drawing heavy inspiration from the original Star Wars trilogy for many of its aspects, and especially its story structure, but that kind of broad appeal is exactly what I'd argue was needed to get people excited about Star Wars again. For those new to the franchise, it was intended to evoke a similar feeling to how the original Star Wars made people feel in 1977, and for longtime fans, it was mostly meant to just be a nostalgia trip. For both, however, it also needed to create something to make you look forward to what came next. And for most people in the audience, it seems like it succeeded. Hell, even the few very loud people who hated it with a burning passion seemed to have an unhealthy interest in both it and the following film. Personally, while I really enjoyed myself watching The Force Awakens, I was also genuinely worried that the next film would try to play things by the numbers too closely, and that we'd be set up for an extremely predictable third film and finale. And the movie we got? Well, let's dig into it now.
I saw raw and wriggling, untamed power.
The film opens with a somewhat superfluous text scroll this time around, which may seem like a complaint, but I actually don't mind this at all. You could just cut it so that The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi were one big long movie, and you'd still understand what was happening here. The format of the mainline Star Wars series demands the text scroll as, you know, basically tradition, and in doing so, it allows you to basically develop characters and plots off screen, which can be a bit of a storytelling cheat. For instance, I was always a little disappointed that Luke went from headstrong apprentice to Jedi Master in basically a blink of an eye between films. So, given that, I appreciate that in this case, we're getting a fairly linear path from the previous film to this one. However, as much as I like that on one level, it creates some small problems, which I will discuss later. So moving past the text scroll, we see the rebels, sorry, the resistance. Wait, no, actually, let's just stop here for a moment, because this is sort of a problem that's transferred from The Force Awakens onto this film. The Force Awakens, understandably given the poor execution of this in the prequels, tries to avoid discussing the political landscape of Star Wars as much as possible. However, in doing this, we're basically left in the dark about what the dynamic was between the Resistance, the New Republic, and the First Order. I mean, you can intuit basically what the dynamic is between the Resistance and the First Order specifically, but then everybody was basically confused about how the New Republic fits into that, unless they decided to read the Extended Universe novels, but that's not something that should be required to understand the film. I wish they had added some sort of scene that made it clear that the Resistance was not a part of the New Republic officially. Leia went off and made that on her own because the New Republic wasn't taking the First Order seriously. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and they couldn't really fix that in The Last Jedi, so we're just sort of stuck in this area. But since those are the only two factions now, since the New Republic was destroyed in the previous film, I guess, whatever. As it stands now, basically the Resistance and the Rebellion are the same thing, and even this movie thinks that they're basically the same thing. So we open on the Resistance fleeing the base we saw them at in the previous film as they're about to be attacked by the First Order. From here we get into a big ol' action sequence that starts with Poe Dameron clowning on General Hux from the previous film, which I've seen people take issue with, but I'm not exactly sure why. My guess is they see him as a Tarkin substitute and therefore don't want him to be diminished as a menacing presence, but he's barely in the previous film, and in this film he's portrayed portrayed far more as a spineless toady than anything resembling the menace of Kylo Ren. I mean, look at this dude. His face is all twisted up like he's constantly smelling a nasty fart. I don't feel we're undermining some big, dominating presence by clowning on him. But this brings me to a broader critique that I don't get from the detractors at all. People who think the humor in this movie is just too silly for Star Wars, which is just, I mean, it's an odd thing to say if you're a fan of the original trilogy.
We're fine. We're all fine here now, thank you. How are you?
R2. That way.
Star Wars has always spent a significant portion of its runtime on goofiness and jokes in order to keep people, and mostly children, engaged. This is nothing new. If you don't like this humor, that's perfectly fine. Comedy is, in my opinion, as subjective as something can get, but claiming that it's not appropriate to the tone of Star Wars is just, I'll say it, is straight up incorrect. Anyway, let's get into discussing the action in this sequence, which I really love. In fact, this film has my favorite action in the entire franchise. In The Force Awakens, they call Poe an amazing pilot and stuff, and they really tried to sell that, but it didn't quite succeed for me. In this movie, however, I bought for the first time that Poe is a supremely talented pilot because I really saw it and got that sense in this first scene. I don't see many complaints about the action in this movie either, so I don't think it's all that controversial to praise that in the grand scheme of things. And within this big ol' action sequence, we get Poe destroying some cannons on the huge ship called the Dreadnought so that it can't use them to attack the bomber ships that are coming in, and Poe ignores Leia's order to pull out of the fight, determined to take the Dreadnought down. This leads us into a bomber run sequence, which is very classic Star Wars with the World War II influence and the visual of the bombs falling, and it doesn't make much sense in space, since, you know, obviously there's no gravity, but it's Star Wars, and Star Wars has never seemed to care much about how space works, so in terms of filmmaking for Star Wars, effective visuals come before making things make sense in space. It's also a genuinely sobering scene for me to see Leia distraught as soldier after soldier dies, especially as we focus on the death of who we later learn is Rose's sister. And this one sequence, to me, made a point about the cost of war far more adeptly and succinctly than Rogue One. But, full disclosure, I hate Rogue One. I really did not enjoy that movie, and I don't want to be too negative in this video, so I will not get into that. This is a positive space, mostly. And I also like that we even get a small glimpse into the last moments of the First Order commander as he comes to terms with his own death. This sequence establishes in your mind the consequences of war and death right off the bat, and it's not even that crazy for Star Wars to cover that topic, seeing as, do you remember Dak in The Empire Strikes Back?
Right now, I feel I can take on the whole Empire myself.
Yeah, you go, Dak. You could take on the Empire. Oh, nope. Oh. All right, I guess he's dead. Oh, and oh my God. All right, well, bye, Dak. Now, something you're gonna notice as we continue on is that I'm not gonna cover every single point here and there. I'm going to cover a lot because there's a lot I want to talk about, but not everything needs to be covered, so a lot of stuff I'm just gonna gloss over. For instance, this part where Hux gets humiliated, and then this whole scene with Finn waking up and all that, I'll touch on it like I just did, but there's not much to say about it at the moment, so I won't. I will say, however, that this transition is frickin' great.
You must have 1,000 questions.
Where's Rey?
And this is where we get to the big one, the huge sticking point for people in the movie. Luke is a grump in this movie. He's not Obi-Wan, he's not Yoda, he's an old, jaded, sad man isolating himself for what he believes is the good of the galaxy. A lot of people take exception to this. They hate how this is how Luke is portrayed, and they blame Rian Johnson for destroying their hero. Now, obviously, given my feelings for this film, I don't agree that it was a bad choice, but let's assume that it is for a moment. If you follow the logic, the person who you should be mad at here isn't necessarily Rian Johnson. Alright, let's break it down. Luke is on this island because he believes that Jedi are bad for the galaxy and need to be allowed to die and not create more problems. He believes this so strongly, he's closed himself off to the Force itself. So if you have a problem with this, I have to ask, what's the alternative here? No matter what, with this movie, Luke being on the island and people needing to find him was the premise of the previous film. Given that info, what reason were they supposed to give for him being on this island? Is he hiding? If so, that would make him cowardly, and Luke being a coward is far more out of character than becoming disillusioned. The First Order wasn't even in power when he went away, so there's nothing to hide from, really. Is he supposed to just be bummed about Kylo Ren? Well, he is, but if that were the only reason, then him just sulking instead of trying to address the problem and fix his mistakes would also be unacceptable. And what, is he supposed to be ignoring the First Order and the wanton death and destruction they've been causing? Ignore the death of his best friend in the previous film? If he were connected to the Force, he would have sensed both of those things and likely tried to help if he thought he could. Is he being held there against his will? I mean, if that were the case, that would make him a pretty weak and ineffective Jedi, wouldn't it? He could use the Force to call Leia for help at any time if he really wanted to, so that's just not an option worth considering. Plus, it's boring. Given all that, he has to be closed off from the Force, otherwise he'll have either been callous or cowardly to not come help at any point, and he needs a good reason to do that. The only conceivable reason for that to be the case would be if he saw his use of the Force as a negative, and his own intervention on the galaxy's behalf also as a negative. So, all that said, if you truly believe that it's wrong for Luke to be the way he is in this film, your problem isn't really with this movie. It's with the decision at the start to have Luke be missing in the first place. The decision Rian Johnson was given the responsibility to explain. J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan chose to include this mystery in the film. With the hand he was given, Rian Johnson created the only story you could tell while maintaining Luke's status as hero. Now that that's all the way, I'm going to talk about how I really enjoy the portrayal of Luke in this film. It's not a retread of Yoda, or Obi-Wan, or Qui-Gon, as far as he had a character. It's an extremely Mark Hamill take on an old, jaded Luke. It's new ground for the role of mentor in Star Wars, as well as new ground for Luke himself, which I'll remind you, we haven't seen in 30 years. That's 30 years of off-screen development of his character. Also, on a personal note, I've just got a thing for grumpy old mentors. It's a trope that almost never fails to be fun for me. The more sarcastic, the better, and Luke in this movie is plenty sarcastic, and I love it. And another great transition.
Wait. Where's Han?
They did the same trick twice, but it works so good both times that I really don't care. And let me just say, before we move on, that I absolutely love Hamill's performance of that line. You can tell just by how he says it that he knows what the answer is and he's scared to hear the answer. Next, we get our very first scene with Kylo Ren. In it, Snoke hits on something that I believe is a fairly subtle through line throughout the film. He talks about the potential of Kylo's bloodline and about making him into a new Vader and whatnot, and I'll touch on the bloodline stuff later, but for now keep it in mind. This scene is our very first glimpse at Snoke in the flesh, as well as his fabulous gown that he's wearing. I actually really like it. And he's a pretty great visual effects feat. The fact that not even the fabric here is real is really impressive because it all looks great. But the real crux of this scene is establishing that Kylo is suffering internally after killing Han. He thought it would finally remove his inner turmoil and conflict, but it's just made things more chaotic inside. It's a great humanizing touch to add. The easy choice would have been to just establish him as thoroughly evil from here on out, but retaining and injecting complexity into his character was really the better option here. This all culminates in Snoke deriding Kylo for his pathetic attempt to mimic Vader with his mask.
You're no Vader. You're just a child in a mask.
And Kylo taking the insult to heart and destroying the mask. Another decision I completely agree with, as the mask is unsuited for a character with as much humanity as Ren. Being able to look at his face and take advantage of Adam Driver's acting ability is important in this film and probably in the future as well. We pick back up with Luke refusing to go with Rey, alluding to mysterious reasons as to why, and then we get a montage of Luke's daily routine. Rey gets distracted and discovers a force tree thing, and then has another talk with Luke in which we get this bit.
Where are you from?
Nowhere.
No one's from nowhere.
Jakku.
Alright, that is pretty much nowhere.
Just keep that in mind for later as well, I'm gonna come back to it. He also mentions that the Jedi need to die, but has not explained why yet. We go from there to Leia demoting Poe and chastising him for getting so many Resistance fighters killed. From there we set up the beacon Rey will use to find them, and then the First Order tracking them through light speed. Then Kylo Ren flies out and basically does the same thing Poe did to the Order at the beginning of the film, taking out their only means of defending themselves with the X-Wings. And we get a great emotional sequence where Kylo Ren and Leia feel each other's presence, and Kylo Ren hesitates in killing her, and decides he won't kill his mother like he did his father. And I really enjoy that decision. It would have been redundant to have him do it again, and it's far more interesting for him to refuse, and it gives you that small hope that he could redeem himself before they snatch it away later in the movie. And then we get a sequence in which we see Leia use the Force for the first and sadly only time. Some people dislike this sequence, but from my first viewing I absolutely loved it. And a not insignificant portion of that was hearing Leia's theme in its full splendor in the background. John Williams did an amazing job with the music in this movie, unsurprising to anybody who's heard John Williams' music. Luke mentioned in Return of the Jedi that Leia would use the Force eventually, and I'm really happy we got to see it happen before we unfortunately lost Carrie Fisher. Leia frankly was sidelined in the previous film, and I think it's safe to say that giving her more time to shine is a positive in any fan's book. We come back to Luke to give us some time with him in the Falcon one last time. It's a really great sequence, and I absolutely love how he just lights up and kind of reverts back to his old self for a short amount of time when he sees R2 again. My only complaint here is that it really makes me wish we had gotten more of him interacting with R2 in the movie. I enjoy all the scenes that he and Rey share together, but R2 just hanging out with them, similar to how he did in Dagobah, would have been real nice. I mean, maybe even some more interactions between Chewie and R2 as well. As much as I don't mind the Porgs, I would have preferred that double act if we wanted some comedy. Speaking of the Porgs, I'm just gonna go back real bit. This is probably the funniest gag with the Porgs in the movie, where Chewie has cooked them and then they're all looking at the cooked Porg. For a second, I thought he was going to actually feed a Porg to the Porgs. Instead, he just felt guilty about eating them, which, that's a good gag, and, you know, it makes you go, aw, Chewie. Going back to the actual scene, R2 shamelessly manipulates Luke's emotions and the audience's emotions with a distress signal from the original Star Wars film, and in doing so convinces Luke to teach Rey the basics of the Force and why the Jedi need to end. Next comes another controversial point in the film, Admiral Holdo. I enjoyed her character in this film. This is another critique I don't fully understand, at least when it comes to the character itself. I've seen people say that it should have been Admiral Akbar, which is, no. Like, seriously, the vast majority of audience members would not have been able to take that seriously. I wouldn't be able to take that seriously, not even a little bit. Akbar is a gag character at best at this point. Holdo can actually emote and speak like a human being and give an actual performance, while Akbar's character is limited and his voice precludes him from doing anything serious, regardless of the talent of the voice actor. Also, anyone who thinks that a legacy character should have filled this role clearly doesn't understand what the role is meant to be, because you're not supposed to trust Holdo the first time you see her. That's why it's valuable to make her a brand new character, because you don't know her, you know Poe. Poe is one of the heroes of the previous film, therefore you trust him, you don't trust her, and it sets you up for the twist of him being completely wrong to do this super heroic, guns blazing thing. It's a very intentional storytelling decision. And the fact that people were saying, oh, well, this established character should have been here, this established character should have been here, shows that they don't actually understand what was happening from a storytelling perspective. Now, this may be a good time to actually discuss Poe's character arc. I really like it. There's a few small issues at the end, but as an arc, I definitely appreciate taking the traditionally heroic character and forcing them to deal with the realities of leadership and the issues of being a shoot first, ask questions later sort of character. Say what you want, but Poe has a very definitive arc in this film that makes me believe that he could be leading the entire Resistance next time we see him, as long as we ignore the fact that he probably should have been executed at some point. But Leia's obviously playing favorites and treats him a bit like a surrogate son, so I'll let that logical loophole slide. Let's just say that Leia's biased, which she is. Remember this line?
I like him. Me too.
They should not be saying that, but obviously they just like him, so they're just gonna let him get away with it. It's not fair, but it does explain it. Back to the actual point in the movie we're in, Poe gets put in his place by Holdo right away, which I imagine causes a lot of audience members to immediately rally against her because, generally, people already like Poe. This, like I already said, was a very conscious decision and meant to set you up for having the rug pulled out from under you when you realize Poe's heroics were exactly what Holdo calls him out for.
You're impulsive, dangerous, and the last thing we need right now.
Meanwhile, we cut to Finn getting ready to abandon ship. He wants to take the beacon Rey will use to find them away from the ship, as it seems doomed, and he doesn't want her, or, let's be honest, himself, to die. In The Force Awakens, Finn found someone to fight for in Rey. However, he never seemed to have any loyalty to the Resistance itself. He somewhat tricked them into saving her, in fact. In this film, he goes from just having someone to fight for, to having something to fight for. Finn still freshly escaped from the First Order. All he wanted was to be away from them. He sidetracked that for Rey, but he hasn't been given any reason to help the Resistance. Throughout this film, he's shown the value of helping not just the people he cares about, but strangers as well, people he doesn't know who need his help regardless. And that's really what the plotline between him and Rose is all about, the value of helping those in need and the ripple effect that creates. It also provides a much needed change of location. The A plot is on a secluded island with water, rocks, and grass. Kind of boring if you don't go elsewhere. The B plot is on a monochromatic spaceship in which death seems inevitable, and that's just a total downer. This, let's say C plot, takes us to a colorful, vibrant space casino, which provides a lot more lighthearted adventure than the rest of what's happening. Now, is that a little atonal? Yeah, there's a running clock, and the characters are goofing off a bit, but it's pretty short, and frankly, there's not much better options in this scenario. I think they picked the lesser of two evils here, and even so, I still think the sequence in Canto Bight is overall fun and engaging. There is a problem with it, but I'll get into that later, because it's not really a writing problem as much as an editing problem. Also, John Williams' jazzy, kind of Caribbean-sounding theme for the casino is just wonderful. kind of skipped ahead a bit there, so let's go back to Rose's introduction. Rose is a good character. In the third act, being perfectly honest, I think she got mishandled, but at heart, her character is a perfectly good addition to the cast for the vast majority of the film. She's unique in the Star Wars world in that she's not much of a fighter as she is an engineer, something I liked, but then they also again kind of muddled a bit at the end when she's in a fighter for no reason, but let's say they're understaffed. Hopefully she isn't doing a whole lot of fighting in the next movie, because I think it's great to have a not combative character in Star Wars that isn't a droid. But as someone whose strengths aren't in fighting, she idolizes the people who fight for the cause, including Finn when they first meet. She quickly realizes he's attempting to escape, however, and that respect goes down the toilet for a bit, which is good because fangirl Rose for the entirety of the film would have been pretty annoying. Together, the two come up with a plan to possibly save the ship, and Finn takes it to the only person he knows in the Resistance who is conscious, Poe, who makes the decision to keep this from Holdo, which, after you see the entire film, is a terrible decision they end up paying for. Maz Kanata points them in the direction of the Master Codebreaker, who Rose and Finn head out to find. Then we get probably the most novel narrative and filmmaking choice, in my view: the shared visions between Rey and Kylo Ren. This is an absolutely novel way to ensure that Rey and Ren have an evolving relationship over the course of the film, even though they don't interact with each other physically. They barely know each other at the end of The Force Awakens. They first meet at the end of the second act, but over the course of this film, they're interacting from the beginning of the second act all the way to the end of the third act, and Johnson hasn't gotten enough credit for this seemingly small and simple decision. And just as a catch-all for people complaining about this stuff that's new in terms of Force powers, let's keep in mind that Jedi couldn't move stuff with their minds until Luke suddenly decided he could do it in Empire, so. For every single one of these scenes, Rian Johnson made sure these two actors were acting against each other on an actual set, even though they're never seen in the same shot together, and that's a fantastic choice for getting the best out of their performers. A director not worrying as much about that could have just had someone reading the lines back to them dispassionately instead, and not spent the time and money on making sure they were really interacting, and I appreciate the extra care taken into making sure that these two acted the best they could. The decision to have us not see what they see as well is a pretty great one. For the majority of these scenes, it's just cross-cutting to imply their connection, and it's extremely effective. I also like Kylo Ren's calm, inquisitive curiosity about what's happening. As a student of the Force, it's probably more rare for him to run into something he doesn't understand, while Rey might just assume that it happens to most Force-sensitive people as she's still new to it. Following this, we get one of my favorite things about the film: the exploration of what the Force actually is. This is our first real exploration of the Force since Yoda talked about it vaguely on Dagobah back in Empire. And here we get a similarly mystical but also a bit more substantial explanation that draws from East Asian philosophy, as most Force-related things have always done. We also get this bit.
I feel something.
You feel it?
Yes, I feel it.
That's the Force.
Really?
Wow, it must be really strong
Oh,
with
I've
you.
never felt any... Ow!
I really like sarcastic Luke. In this new explanation, the Force becomes more explicitly a parallel to the idea of yin and yang. Interestingly, here, Luke says that the Force is balanced and obviously accepts that, but he still holds the Jedi idea that the light side is all you should strive to explore.
You went straight to the dark.
I'm not sure where we'll end up landing when it comes to this. Episode 9 might potentially explore this, though with J.J. Abrams directing again, I'm not sure that'll happen. But it seems to me that strict adherence to light or dark might be the biggest problem in the Star Wars universe that even Luke can't see. But again, I'll get into that later. There's a lot of things we're going to discuss later, so I apologize for that, but eventually we'll get to it. This scene is also where we discover Luke has closed himself off from the Force. After another small, tantalizing bit of dialogue between Rey and Kylo,
You called me a monster.
You are a monster.
Yes, I am.
we follow Finn and Rose to Canto Bight, where we see the one thing above all else that led to their plan failing.
I told Rose too. I said, this is a public beach. We can't park that shuttle here.
I find this kind of funny, but it also plays to the theme. Rose and Finn impulsively just parked at the first place they found to run into the casino instead of taking the time to follow the rules so they could simply get off the planet with the guy they needed. Had they parked somewhere appropriate, the plan might have actually succeeded, ill-conceived as it was. But with the best intentions, Finn and Rose were too impatient to do things right. Also, here's where we get a bit of social commentary showing the hierarchy of life on Canto Bight and the exploitation that comes with all the glitz and glamour of the casino. Now, your appetite for this social commentary will vary. This lines up very well with my own personal beliefs concerning things like the wealth gap and whatnot, but I'll avoid going too deep into that right now. I mainly just want to say that both this here and the moment where they discuss war profiteering in the Star Wars universe were very compelling to me, and I'd love to see this explored further in Rian Johnson's own Star Wars trilogy in the future. Next up, we get Rey messing around with her lightsaber, basically explaining via her staff why she's already pretty good with one and didn't need to be trained physically in this film or the previous film. And then we get the deepest cut into the Jedi from Luke, one that rings truest on a fairly objective level.
The legacy of the Jedi is failure.
Also, you get a little bit of insight into maybe why Rey does what she does in the third act, beyond just wanting to help Kylo Ren.
You believed that he wasn't gone, that he could be turned.
And I became a legend.
Put simply, Rey wants to be special. She needs to be special. This was established in The Force Awakens.
Classified, really? Me too. Big secret.
She obviously, even by the end of that film, doesn't know any big secret about herself. She just knows she was abandoned. But she was raised on the story of Luke Skywalker with a secret parentage and ties to an ancient order of warriors. She, like lots of people, probably spent years of her life hoping beyond hope that she was destined for greatness. She was surrounded by a world that didn't care about her, forced to participate in a junker economy that forced her to work for portions of food and made upward advancement impossible. Her only way out was hoping someone would come and save her from being herself. Look at her face when Luke says he became a legend, and keep that in mind for later. Also this.
My nephew, with that mighty Skywalker blood.
Another mention of the Skywalker bloodline. Keep it in the back of your mind. We soon get a flashback of everything that went wrong with Ben Solo, and Mark Hamill's performance here is just great. I mean, he does a great job this entire film, but this is one of the good moments. Next, we get a grim foreshadowing of Admiral Holdo's eventual fate and reminder of what's at stake for the Resistance. Also, even they refer to themselves as rebels. Which I find kind of funny. By the way, some people for some reason took exception to his use of Godspeed instead of May the Force be with you. But frankly, out of all the nitpicks, that one is the dumbest. Like, is there only one possible line they could use in all situations? That's absolutely ridiculous. Anyway, let's move on. We come back to Finn and Rose in a cell, and we're introduced to DJ, played by Benicio del Toro. In nearly every way, his character is meant to evoke Han Solo, basically tricking the audience into trusting him implicitly because of what they experienced in previous films. I'll discuss why near the end. This is also where we get the big chase scene with the puppy horses, and at this point I think I understand what the real issue is with these scenes for some people. People seem to feel this stuff is too long and wish stuff had been cut out, but I'm really not sure cutting scenes is actually the solution in this case. In fact, Canto Bight is already really streamlined, all things considered. If any one of these scenes were cut, important stuff later would be completely messed up. However, the issue with these sequences for many people is real, and there's a more subtle problem at play here. The Canto Bight stuff, and this sequence more specifically, probably needed a break between different sections. Specifically, I think there should have been a scene between this scene
What's your story, Roundy?
and this stuff with the puppy horses. With that small change, this subplot likely would have felt a lot better for people and they wouldn't have complained anywhere near as harshly about it. I think this is a scenario where a lot of people know how they feel about something, but, as is often the case when someone doesn't know anything about filmmaking, misdiagnose the situation. I'd likely put the next sequence where Rey and Kylo Ren bond in between these two sections. The one where Kylo kind of convinces Rey to go look in the dark side hole. And then, when Finn and Rose end up having to go with DJ, cut back to Rey doing the trippy Force mirror stuff. That may have fixed the pacing issues people had with this section to a decent extent. Though, I can understand why they also may not have wanted to cut this next sequence in half, but that may have been the lesser two evils in this case. Though, to be completely and totally fair, I'm saying this in hindsight, and different people will have different opinions on how this should have been cut, so it's not objective. And for all I know, it actually would have lost something by cutting up that sequence with Rey, and this was the lesser of two evils. I can't really know because I haven't re-edited and watched the entire film myself, and I'll never be able to watch it with fresh eyes anyway, so I'll never really know, and neither will anyone else. So again, this is not an objective thing that they should have done, it's just something I think they could have done that might have mitigated the criticism of this section in particular. But I could be wrong. Speaking of all that, next we get a scene where Luke opens himself back up to the Force, and instantly he and Leia feel each other's presence. Then we get Kylo Ren and Rey talking again, and this conversation is by far my favorite one. No, not because of that, because of this.
Why did you hate your father? Give me an honest answer.
I didn't hate him.
I really love this line. There's so many implications in it that are just really interesting to unpack. It's easy to assume, even with Kylo Ren obviously being torn up about killing Han, that at least on some level he resented or hated Han. But here, he just straight up says he didn't hate him. He knew he loved his father, and in his mind, killing him was making the ultimate sacrifice for the dark side. He was giving up something he cared about because somewhere in his twisted psyche, he believed it was the right thing to do. And now is as good a time as any to address this.
Let the past die. Kill it, if you have to.
People have mistakenly thought that what Kylo Ren says here is what Rian Johnson is saying needs to happen to the franchise. But the only way you can truly believe that is if you're not taking the entire context of the film into consideration. Remember, this is the villain saying this, and here's something else to chew on. Luke and Kylo Ren are telling Rey the same thing. They are both telling Rey to let the past die, though Kylo's, more aggressive about it. They believe this for different reasons, but in the end, both of them are revealed to be wrong. Remember what Luke harps on with the Force: balance. On one end, you have Luke and Kylo demanding an end to everything Rey idolizes, and on the other end, you have Rey and Poe idolizing the past so much that they set out to do things just like in the stories they love, and this also proves to be a mistake. The balance between those two things is to acknowledge and, at times, indulge in what you used to love about Star Wars, but to also make sure to create something new and exciting from that love. Build upon it rather than mimic it. That's assuming that there was any meta-commentary intended at all, which it's very likely that there wasn't any, and it just sort of came across that way. And you know what, I should just make a general statement about that real quick. Everything I'm talking about here, everything that I'm saying about like deeper meaning in this movie and all that stuff, I am not in any way claiming that that was the intent of the writing of Rian Johnson. This is just what I see in the story and what I get out of it, and it should never be misconstrued as a declaration of intent. Anyway, let's move on. We get another flashback from Kylo Ren's perspective. Ren claims Luke attempted to murder him. Rey refuses to believe him, but finds herself drawn to a chirpy mirror looking for answers that she wants. This sequence is obviously reminiscent of the cave on Dagobah that Yoda sent Luke to, though I really like that it's less obvious in its messaging. Unlike the pretty blatant visual metaphor of Luke destroying himself if he destroys Vader, you could define numerous meanings from this vision. It's very vague and it really helps to feel mystical and mysterious to me. It's like it took a page out of the George R.R. Martin school of magic visions and prophecies. From here we get the bit where Rey and Kylo Ren truly bond and touch hands, and we finally see them on screen at the same time, which is just great visual storytelling. In this shot of Luke blasting apart the hut is just awesome, and they did it practically, which makes it even more cool. From here, Rey and Luke clash, then we get a fuller picture of what happened to Luke and Ben Solo, with Luke's second flashback where he stops leaving out parts. And now is when I'm going to note that they filmed the stuff 3 different times depending on what the person talking to Rey was saying, which is a very nice touch. I'll also discuss the fact that for many people, this is their biggest problem with Luke's character in the film, and while I don't intend to tell people that they're wrong for feeling that way, I will explain why it doesn't bug me. Frankly, it doesn't bug me mostly because I find it interesting for Luke to have made this mistake. You can hear the noises representing what Luke sees in Ben's mind right here. And given how visceral we've seen Rey's visions be, it's not that crazy to think that someone seeing death and destruction that viscerally, someone who has already experienced war and death and may not want to experience it again, could decide that there's only one answer. Luke wouldn't have actually killed him, as we see in his telling, but for that small moment he considered it. And if Snoke was already twisting Ben's mind, how this could just confirm everything Snoke said to him is pretty obvious. From here, Rey decides that she's gonna do what Luke did for Vader, and turn Ben Solo to the light side. Luke may have been brought down in her mind, but she's still trying to live out these stories that she loves, use it to bring meaning to her life. Luke is even more convinced that he and the Jedi just create problems. He goes to burn down the tree with all the books in it, but hesitates. But Yoda shows up and burns the books for him. Again, this could and has been taken as Yoda believing that you need to destroy the past as well, but if you pay attention to his words, you get a different message. Now, let me just say that this was my favorite scene in the theater by far. It was a complete surprise for me, and I was really happy to see Luke and Yoda talking one last time. Yoda giving Luke his final lesson.
Pass on what you have learned. Strength, mastery, but failure also. Yes, failure most of all. The greatest teacher, failure is.
Luke saw his failure and the failure of his predecessors as a condemnation of everything the Jedi ever taught, and in doing so attempted to throw out all the good that the Jedi have done as well. Yoda didn't burn the tree because the past needs to be destroyed. He burned it because Luke was obsessed with the past, and burning the tree is a symbolic removal of that obsession. The film lands on the idea that it's important to teach the next generation how you and those before you failed so that they don't make the same mistakes you did.
We are what they grow beyond.
Luke's arc is all about how he failed in being a teacher and just gave up, which, when you think about it, is completely within his character. Luke was never perfect. One of his biggest character flaws was giving up too quickly when he couldn't see a road to success.
You want the impossible.
One he overcomes by the end of this film. Next, we get a sequence where we see a bit more of DJ, who refuses to help without being given something in return. That something being Rose's necklace left to her by her sister, who died literally hours before. DJ then shows Finn the tenets of his own philosophy. He believes there's no difference between the good guys and the bad guys. He's a full-on moral relativist. Obviously, the film does not agree with this either, given DJ's eventual reveal as a traitor. And of course, you know, the fact that it's Star Wars. Next, we get a scene where Poe confronts Holdo, and in doing so, finds out that she's fueling the small transport ships, and he misunderstands her plan. Now, this is usually when people ask, why didn't she tell Poe her plan from the beginning? Well...
Finn, Holdo's loading the crew in the shuttle. She's going to abandon ship.
I mean, that's why. They didn't know how they were being tracked through lightspeed because Poe decided not to tell Holdo, you know, like an idiot. So as far as she knew, there was a spy in the Resistance. And from Holdo's perspective, it could easily be the guy who got their entire bomber fleet wiped out. Or someone the obviously impulsive guy might tell. Which is why even when he incorrectly interprets her plan, it's still in her best interest to not tell him what it actually is. Now, why Poe wasn't thrown in the brig after discovering the plan is something worth bringing up. That's a nitpick I can absolutely agree with. He should have been locked up immediately. But since I like the majority of what's going on here, I am, to be perfectly honest, overlooking that, as we do with all movies we like. And if you say you don't do that with movies that you like, either you don't like any movies because they're all flawed in some way, or you're lying, in which case, stop it. Rey decides to have herself captured intentionally, again outright mimicking Luke's decisions in Return of the Jedi. Meanwhile, Finn and Rose break into the destroyer and Poe does a mutiny, and we get probably the best joke in the film. While Finn and Rose sneak into the destroyer, Rey is brought to Snoke and DJ chooses to show a bit of his humanity. And for the record here, I don't think this is a trick or anything. Right now, DJ thinks that everything's going smoothly. DJ isn't a monster, he's just a guy who will look out for himself first and foremost. He saw the medallion was important to Rose, and already found plenty of money on that ship he stole, not to mention the stuff that the rebellion was about to pay him, and he probably figured that it meant more to her than it ever would to him. It's not like it looks expensive or anything. So yeah, I think he just honestly did a nice thing here because he wanted to. Plus, you know, it does the obvious narrative thing of making you think, oh, he's like a Han Solo guy, and then like, nope, he betrays everybody because he has no loyalties. So, you know, it's a twofer, adding some depth to the character and misdirecting the audience. Meanwhile, Holdo shows off why she's Admiral by seizing the first opportunity to foil Poe's mutiny. I also like how C-3PO refers to the mutiny as quote-unquote not correct protocol, though, small side note, I wish they'd kept his right arm. No particular reason, I just liked it. And of course, Finn and Rose's plan fails when Captain Phasma keeps them from even approaching the flux capacitor thing they were using to track ships. Also, do not mess with Leia Organa. Then they load the transport ships and Holdo stays behind to pilot the ship while everyone else escapes. Now, as for why they didn't just have a droid do it, first off, rude. Obviously, droids are sentient beings, so don't be racist. Secondly, the captain always goes down with their ship. Thirdly, here's a real point. In the very first Star Wars film ever made, it was established that life signs could be read inside ships and escape pods.
There goes another one.
Hold your fire. There's no life forms. It must have short-circuited.
If they couldn't read life signs on the ship, they'd notice that there was a problem and find the transports. I just out-nitpicked your nitpick. So, there. And now we return to Tangent Town with me, the guy who goes on tangents as Snoke meets Rey.
Darkness rises and light to meet it.
This line is extremely interesting to me. Ever since the prequels, we've heard talk of balancing the Force, and in the prequels, it didn't really make much sense because the Jedi knew that they outnumber the Sith, and therefore they should have known that balancing the Force would ultimately mean less Jedi, but anyway. Here, I get the implication that the Force is kind of always going to balance itself between light and dark, and I find that very interesting, and it got me thinking. Specifically, it got me thinking about the famous Rule of Two that the Sith had. Why only limit yourself to a master and an apprentice when the Jedi train a bajillion other Jedi constantly? People have always said it's because there's always infighting that tore them apart, but I find that explanation pretty weak. However, try this one on for size. They stick to the Rule of Two because it makes them stronger. Think about it. Why was Darth Sidious so much more powerful than any individual Jedi in the Jedi Order, including Yoda? Powerful enough to be able to cloud their sight and keep himself hidden from them when he was literally right in front of them. Well, let's consider what balance means. In order for something to be balanced, they need to be equal. And if people harnessing the dark and light sides of the Force are unequal in number, how would the Force balance itself? My theory? The Sith discovered that the more apprentices they trained, the less powerful they themselves became, because they would basically be giving some of their share of the dark side to those apprentices. So when the Jedi Order trains hundreds of Jedi to use the light side, and the Sith only train a handful, the Sith get more power on an individual level more easily. And it also explains why Rey is so powerful in the Force so quickly, and for that matter, why Luke was with very little training as well. It really goes a long way to explain things that don't necessarily need to be explained, but are fun to think about. gonna speed things up now as I've talked about most of the big topics I wanted to get to at this point. Snoke tortures Rey, the Resistance begins to escape, and DJ betrays Finn and Rose. And fun fact about this moment.
You're wrong. Maybe.
That is such a good line, and it was not in the script. Apparently Benicio del Toro brought it to Rian Johnson and they just went with it. And I'd like to take a moment to note how I really like Benicio del Toro's acting here. DJ isn't being villainous, he isn't being like, ha ha ha, I got ya. He's ashamed of himself. He actually feels bad because he likes these people, and I like that touch to his character. I'd like to see the character come back. So the Resistance begins getting blown up as a result. And you know, I guess if Rose and Finn keep this to themselves, nobody has to know that it was them and Poe's fault that so many people died. I don't know, maybe they just didn't tell anybody. I wouldn't. After this, we get the big scene where Snoke gloats and tells Kylo Ben to kill Rey. And Kylo instead, in a very clever sequence, tricks Snoke into allowing himself to be murdered instead. This, erroneously, of course, comes across as Ben being redeemed. But it's more complicated than that. I know some people have a problem with Snoke not being quote-unquote explained here, but I'll be honest, I just don't care about that, not even a little bit. It was never set up as some big mystery that needed solving, and I see no reason to get hung up on it. Let's go ahead and talk about this fight scene now. This is the best bit of combat in Star Wars we've gotten thus far. The original trilogy focused more on emotion than action, and the prequels had mostly just over-choreographed fights outside of the still very good Duel of Fate sequence. But here, we get a genuinely inventive and fun fight sequence. And yeah, people pointed out that a dagger disappears in the middle of this shot here, which, again, I don't care. Why would you care? That's like pointing out a continuity error between shots in a film. It's not detrimental to the viewing experience unless you go out of your way to look for it. And it definitely doesn't affect how good the choreography and the scene as a whole is. It's such a weird thing to bring up and use to devalue an entire action sequence. That one really gets to me, because it's like, it's one shot, it doesn't actually matter, and it doesn't devalue an entire sequence made up of many shots that together create something worth more than a single shot could ever be worth. You know, that's what a movie is. So yeah, that's really annoying to me. Anyway, after all the guards are dead, we get the reveal. Ben has no intention of switching sides. He was just seizing power. And then we get another bombshell.
Do you want to know the truth about your parents?
They were nobody.
They're filthy junk traders who sold you off for drinking money.
Rey doesn't have any special lineage. She doesn't have special Skywalker genes or Kenobi blood. She's not a virgin birth. She's not the chosen one. She's just Rey. And, as Rian Johnson noted in the commentary for this film, this is the worst possible news for Rey to get. For Luke, finding out the father he thought was a virtuous hero was actually the evil man who killed Obi-Wan Kenobi was the worst possible thing he could hear. For Rey, it's just finding out that there's nothing about her past that makes her special.
You have no place in this story. You come from nothing. You're nothing.
The stories told Rey that she could only be special if she was like a secret Skywalker or something else. Something had to make her special. Of course, we know that Rey is special. We're watching her movie, she's the hero. And not having special parents doesn't change that. And that's really such a positive turn for this to take, and the only one I personally was ever going to be satisfied with. No matter what, it would be disappointing for her to simply be yet another Skywalker. Not to mention it would raise serious moral questions about whomever left her to be a wage slave for a criminal like Unkar Plutt. Above all else, if Luke Skywalker had done that, that would be what would ruin him for me. But this is a story about a, relatively, normal person. A nobody. And I really like that. Rey and Ben clash, and everything comes to a head when Holdo uses lightspeed to cut through the First Order fleet. And now, I guess I have to discuss the nitpicks about this. Actually, one moment. I recorded a whole big, long explanation talking about how, yeah, this would be costly, it would cost money, it's a very specific thing, look at how the damage spreads out, you had to make sure nothing was in your way, you gotta make sure the aim was right, all this stuff explaining why this isn't, you know, a thing that you should nitpick, but really, how joyless and annoying do you have to be to see that and go, that doesn't make sense? We're watching Star Wars. The entire point of Star Wars is George Lucas wanted to make a Flash Gordon with laser swords and samurai. Have some f***ing fun. And I said this was gonna be a judgment-free zone, but I'm sorry, I'm making an exception here. Learn to have fun if, for some reason, you hate this because no one's done it before. Star Wars is not science fiction, it's science fantasy. Embrace the fantasy, or I don't know, stop watching Star Wars because that's what it is, man. Anyway, I'm sorry. Again, that was a little judgy. And I said I wouldn't be judgmental. I'm moving on now. So now Finn and Rose have to make their escape, and here's a serious complaint I actually have with the movie. I don't like how quickly and easily Phasma goes down here. And this is a case where the original scene that was created for this film was way better than what we got. The deleted scene has Finn dead to rights, surrounded by stormtroopers awaiting Phasma's command. But Finn calls Phasma out.
When I put a gun to your head, you shut down Starkiller shields.
The other troopers see Phasma as a coward, and we get this great moment where we see her basically shoot them all down like a sharpshooter cowboy when she sees them turning against her. And then when it's down to just Finn and Phasma, we get that great Rebel Scum line, and he manages to gun her down and defeat her. That feels far more climactic and satisfying to me, and I would have accepted that as her death. As it stands, the version in this film is less interesting and fairly disappointing for me, unless she somehow survived that like she did Starkiller Base. If she did survive and we get a better story for her in the next film, I'll retract this complaint. And I won't even ask how because, again, who cares? So let's speed up again. Kylo Ren takes command as Supreme Leader, and everybody heads to Crate for what I'm gonna call the fourth act of the film. And I'm a little torn about this. There's still another half hour of film left here, and it does get a bit draining. Especially because the movie feels like it's had its climax. I like a lot of stuff in this finale, but part of me really wishes they'd found a way to simplify it and end it, right about here. And I'll also say that I understand people's problem with what comes up next. The Resistance does some action stuff to keep the laser battering ram from knocking down the door. Poe's show character growth by not risking his troops' lives unnecessarily, which is all great, and it looks like Finn is going to sacrifice himself for the cause. Rose rams into him and stops him from doing so and says this.
That's how we're gonna win. Not fighting what we hate. Saving what we love.
And then she kisses him, and this all kind of comes out of nowhere, and I'll give people this. Telling Finn that sacrificing his life is bad after Holdo did something similar genuinely muddles the story and hurts the film. I really think we could have done without this. Now, there's a lot of good stuff in here. They genuinely tricked me into thinking Finn was about to die, and that moment of suspense is very emotional and real, but I don't think it's worth it when they end up confusing the issue and adding a new theme to the film in the final stretch. There's probably something better they could have done here instead. All that said, let's get to the good stuff. Luke's final stand. Apparently people wanted more from this, but really, there's nothing more in character than Luke resolving a situation with non-violence. He won in Return of the Jedi by throwing away his lightsaber, after all. And it's great that this facilitated a final scene with Luke and Leia, and this line is just great.
Strike me down in anger and I'll always be with you, just like your father.
What I'm a little less certain about is Luke dying here, and I kind of say this for just selfish reasons. Thematically, it makes complete sense for this to be where Luke says goodbye, but on a personal level, I loved Mark Hamill's performance so much that I desperately want to see more of it. But on the other hand, the binary sunset was such a wonderful idea. So really, I just hope we get to see Luke again in the form of a Force Ghost talking to Rey in Episode 9, just so we can get a bit more of him before really saying goodbye to the character for good, especially with Carrie Fisher no longer being with us. So, Rey lifts rocks and saves the day, Kylo gets punked, Finn has a new crush, the Resistance survives, and we get a final moment where we see some slave kids Finn and Rose met, inspired by them and the legend of Luke Skywalker, and the film ends by basically telling the kids in the audience that they can be a Jedi too. And what I loved when I left the theater, almost more than anything else, is that I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen in the next film. There's potential for basically anything to happen. I imagine the Knights of Ren should be involved, though. They were mentioned in The Force Awakens, and we haven't seen anything about them so far, so they should come back. So, put that on the wish list. On a personal note, while I noted how I enjoyed the through line between The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, I hope the next film jumps forward in time, like a few years. I mean, honestly, they're probably going to have to, given the fact that they need to address the absence of Leia, but this is a situation where so much has happened to these characters within what amounts to, at most, like a couple of weeks, couple months? It's really time to give them some room to breathe. And, I guess, full disclosure, I didn't even watch Solo. I wasn't interested in it. And I'm actually glad that they're pulling back on some of the other, Star Wars story films because, again, I was not interested in those films. I want to move forward, I don't want to move backwards. But I'm still very excited for the future of Star Wars. More excited than worried. And if you didn't understand why before, maybe you'll understand a little bit more now. I mean, I hope so. I spent like 8 hours straight writing this script when I wrote it. And then I spent a really long time editing it, all that to express why I love Star Wars The Last Jedi and why I'm excited for what comes next. So hopefully at this point, even if you don't feel the same way, you get why I do. And that's really all I was trying to do here. So hopefully I succeeded, and I will end the video now. That's it, bye.